I am someone who is equally driven by thinking and feeling. When I've taken the Myers-Briggs personality test on multiple occasions, it really varies depending on the day whether I get thinking or feeling for my second attribute, and it is always divided up pretty close to 50-50 between the two. Because of this aspect of my personality, I cannot be satisfied with anything intellectually unless I can be made to feel it, and I cannot be satisfied with anything emotionally unless I can be made to understand why I enjoy it and what its purpose is. Video games have always affected me on an emotional level, yet they have always simultaneously faced the threat of failing to justify their enjoyment to me on an intellectual level. There are many who claim that games are useless, a waste of time, and childish. At times I have come to be persuaded of this, especially in moments of self-indulgence in which I found my heavy eyes moving from the computer screen to the time on the lock screen of my phone, to find that my evening gaming session had extended itself well into the following morning. Maybe this is a hobby for children, I thought, and it is about time I've grown up. Yet despite temporarily reaching this conclusion in my mind, I could not quite let go of a nostalgic yearning for the way in which my pre-adolescent imagination could effortlessly immerse my mind in a game world. Now there are certainly feelings you shouldn't listen to. If you are a married man and you find yourself desiring to ignite some new spontaneous romantic flame with a girl you've just met, you are thinking with the wrong head and need to get bonked on the noggin and thrown in horny jail. Such feelings are what the philosophers call passions, which need to be subjected to one's reason and suppressed in instances like this. Yet there are other longings of a different sort, which are not of an immoral quality, but are rather good desires which draw us toward a higher meaning and purpose. Ultimately, humans are in constant motion, either moving toward a higher good, or degenerating toward self-destruction, and desires, good or bad, are what draw us toward either end. So the question I asked myself is whether my enjoyment of video games truly was the holding on of idle, childish things when I really ought to be moving on to adulthood, or whether there is some deeper significance which could spark a re-enchantment, a more mature appreciation of the same underlying beauty which initially attracted me to video games as a child. This might sound like I'm overthinking things, and maybe so. But as Plato said, the unexamined life is not worth living, and this has inspired a similar principle in myself, which is that the unexamined activity is not worth doing, and considering that the grave has eventually dragged down everyone that lived to a certain old age before me, the odds aren't exactly in my favor of having an infinite amount of time to do whatever I feel like doing at any given moment. Eventually I'll reach the pearly gates and have to give an account of how I used my time and why. So I think it's best to consider whether or not games really are valuable, meaningful things, and that's what I've set out to do in this video. To begin such a discussion, a preliminary question we must ask is, what exactly is a game? Scrolling the Wikipedia page for game, I know, this is quite in-depth research on my part. It seems that many have tried their hand at providing a definition, some more successfully than others. One attempt at a definition was made by French sociologist Roger Caillois in 1961, who lists 6 characteristics of a game. Fun, the activity is chosen for its light-hearted character. Separate, it is circumscribed in time and place. Uncertain, the outcome of the activity is unforeseeable. Non-productive, participation does not accomplish anything useful. Governed by rules, the activity has rules that are different from everyday life. Fictitious, it is accompanied by the awareness of a different reality. Now, there are a number of things we'd consider games that do fit all these criteria, but I don't think this can be comprehensively applied to all of them. Even if games are chosen because they are fun, I'm not sure that always means they are lighthearted. One might scream in horror or be brought to tears by a game, all while simultaneously having fun in the process. Further, games, especially for children, often do have a productive element, whether it be educational or, as in the case of The Quiet Game, an attempt to get adults some peace and quiet. Other definitions, some of which focus on computer or video games specifically, include elements such as being made for profit, allows attacks rather than pure competition, includes the management of resources, has more than one player, and so forth. All of these elements I think are too specific and create too many outliers to be helpful. I believe there is more accuracy in those who take a simpler route, such as Kevin J. Maroney, who writes, "A game is a form of play with goals and structure." Similarly, but in a bit more detail, Bernard Suits writes, "To play a game is to engage in activity directed toward bringing about a specific state of affairs, using only means permitted by specific rules, where the means permitted by the rules are more limited in scope than they would be in the absence of the rules. and where the sole reason for accepting such limitation is to make possible such activity. So, essentially, a game involves the voluntary participation in an activity bound by specific rules and limitations under which one pursues a particular goal, and for some reason, we find this really fun. But what exactly is that reason? Why do we enjoy pursuing a goal with self-imposed limitations? If you asked Rousseau, whose thought, in my opinion, has essentially created the way of thinking which we modern people simply take for granted as fact, you'd think that humans hate limitations. He writes, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." He thus celebrated the way in which imagination exceeds the bounds of reality, writing, "The world of reality has its limits. The world of imagination is boundless." For Rousseau, and for all of us modern people after him, the problem with the world is that our true self is an authentic, spontaneous, independent individual trapped inside our minds, but the restrictions of life and rules of those around us hold us captive. Life would be great if we could only break these bonds and be our true, boundless, authentic selves. Whatever we feel, that is our truth, and the world outside of us shouldn't be able to tell us what to do or limit us in any way. If we were all free of rules, laws, limitations, expectations, and judgment, we'd all finally be happy, right? Well, not exactly. The satisfaction of a game, a mere self-imposed set of rules with a simple goal, speaks a message quite to the contrary. In a previous video, I discussed how the fantasy genre, though often thought to be fundamentally about unreality, is in a way actually an imitation of reality and its rules. It is actually by being subjected to a new set of rules that feel much like the very limitations we experience in our daily life that we are able to be immersed in a fantasy world. And it is the same way with games. In games, we impose upon ourselves limits and rules that provide the context and meaning within which we can pursue a particular goal. Thus, actions like throwing a ball or pressing a button, which would otherwise be entirely meaningless, are suddenly invested with meaning and purpose. In a way, such limitations actually give us a kind of freedom which we wouldn't have were we truly limitless. So it turns out that freedom is not, as us moderns have been conditioned to think, limitlessness, but is rather to be bound by good and satisfying limits that guide us toward a good and satisfying goal. It is, after all, only because I am born a human, with all the expectations, customs, physical and biological facts that come along with it, that I can come to any sort of conclusion about how I'm supposed to live. It is only because of the law of gravity that I can walk or run where I want to. Without the limitations of gravity, I'd float off into space and suffocate. Without a government with laws against theft, I'd much more likely be robbed before exercising the freedom to purchase the goods I want or need with the money I've saved. So what games tell us is that we as humans do not truly desire, nor is it consistent with our pursuit of the good life, to be free of limits. Rather, we are created for and are most satisfied with a life full of good limits. In a way, a video game is very much like a religious ritual or liturgy. In both, we derive satisfaction from a set of interactive steps which have been prepared beforehand by someone else. And in doing so, we participate in a process that communicates meaning to us, and by which we also communicate our agreement or understanding of that meaning. In a similar manner to the ancient Israelites stepping into the shoes of their ancestors as they fled Egypt through the ritual acts of their Passover liturgy, so also we step into the shoes of a character and participate in their story through the game mechanics that make it possible. I think that through this close similarity, games can help us understand the wisdom and pleasure of the ancient religious way of life that still lives on in churches, which we may formerly have dismissed as boring or inauthentic. The old woman who prays her ancient prayers, kneels and rises at the proper time during the church service, and crosses herself at the mention of the Trinity, is not merely going through the motions, as we might suspect. Yes, she is going through motions. But they are not merely motions, just as playing a video game is not merely mashing buttons, and as speaking is not merely flapping one's lips. Just as we gamers might repeat the same old game mechanic several hundred times as we progress through a campaign, the old religious woman crosses herself the same way each day at the end of her morning prayer, as she moves ever closer through life toward her heavenly goal of communion with and likeness to God. Games teach us that life itself is about freedom and advancement not in spite of, but rather by means of, rules and limits. We must learn not to despise the limits of biology, morality, authority, religion, or our lot in life, but rather to embrace them, to give thanks for them, and to learn from them as our guides toward our ultimate goal. They are what makes the process of life enjoyable, and how we are directed toward our purpose as human beings. This, I believe, is why games make such a satisfying escape from the world as we know it today. In a world in which we are told to shape our own destiny, to rebel against the morality and worldview of past generations, and even to reject basic biology, we can often find ourselves without any sense of direction. Yet games have a clear objective and outline a path for us to get there. It is a true escape from the senselessness of dreadful modernity. In this way, games give us a glimpse of life as it ought to be. So learn to love good limits and rules, reject chaos, embrace God-given order, embrace ritual and liturgy, embrace goodness, truth, and beauty, not as mere opinion but as objective fact that is baked into every part of reality. Revolt against the boundless, shapeless modern world, and embrace the peace of an orderly world, bound by customs, conventions, and meaning. Pursue goals, mark them on your map, track your progress, and get where you want to go with determination and confidence in life's objective value. In a way, to take life seriously actually is, in a certain sense, to treat it like a game. And so I ask you, are you winning, son? Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe and all that.